Hi guys, so today we're going to go over our most favorited video of all of the Instagram lives and all of the Facebook lives that we've ever done. We're going to talk to you guys today about ego states and about how these ego states affect your interpersonal world and your outer personal world, your relationships with other people. This technique was a total game changer for us in healing our relationship. Once we understood where we were operating from in these different ego states that we're about to go over, it changed the game for us.
It changed everything. All of a sudden, I understood my entire childhood experience. And then I understood how I impacted my own children from these different ego states. So we are really excited to be here and to talk about these with you. This is based on transactional analysis, which was founded by Eric Berne, and he has written an amazing book, which I recommend to people, called Games People Play. It really illustrates how these parent, adult, child ego states impact your relationships and really have been handed down from generation to generation in our families, and it's completely unconscious. And when I first learned about these and how they were impacting the relationships I had that were romantic, the relationships I had with my family members, it changed everything.
And not just your relationships with others, but your relationship with yourself. I mean, how many of us have this internal nagging, this inner voice that is just so toxic and cruel to ourselves all day long?
Right.
We have to find out where that voice comes from, because we can't start speaking kindly and being joyful if inside all day long all we hear is the nonstop chatter of you're not good enough, you're not lovable enough, nobody cares about you, oh, there you go again, all of that stuff. You need to know where that voice is coming from, and once you know where it's coming from, we're also going to give you the tools on how to heal that. So let's go. Let's start.
Sounds great.
So on the board, my mom's going to draw two little jelly beans. And each one of these represents a person. So there's one person. We'll say this is Andrea, or this is Alexis. This will be Andrea.
Okay.
Or no, we'll swap. So this is Alexis, this is Andrea. And inside each person, there are three different ego states. My mom's going to draw three separate circles for those. So that's one ego state. It's good to use different colors so people can really tell the difference. Perfect. That's another ego state. And we have one more. Perfect. Awesome. So each of these are individual people and three ego states for each person. The first ego state is the capital P, the parent, the parent ego state. And the middle one is the adult. And the bottom one is the child, the inner child.
Now, it's really interesting because by the time you're 7 years old, you have fully developed all three of these primary ego states. And there are different aspects of each ego state as well. And what happens is, depending on the type of parents we have, depending on what ego state they're operating from, we start to adapt in ways that are responding to how we feel based on the ego state that they're operating from. So let's talk about the parent ego state.
Let's put these down. So
first, we're going to look at the critical parent ego state.
The CP.
So critical parent is the voice inside of our head that's like, you should know better. How dare you? Why didn't you do that better?
There you go again. I can't believe you. All of the shame, all of the blame, all of the guilting, all of the anger, all of the rage, right? And so what happens when we have critical parent and you're a child is that, so Andrea's up here, she's being the critical parent to little Alexis down here, the child.
And then Alexis responds with rebellious child.
either the rebellious child or sometimes the adaptive child. I will say for me, I started with my adaptive child, and then by the time I was a preteen, I went into my rebellious child. So adaptive children grow up to be people pleasers. They are often codependent. They don't know how to prioritize themselves or to have healthy relationships.
They don't have boundaries.
So let's talk about this. So Andrea's the critical parent to Alexis. So
and this is called a transaction. Every time I operate from an ego state with another person, I'm creating a transaction.
Yes. So Andrea's critical parent goes, Alexis, I told you to clean your room. Why isn't your room clean? Okay? And the 7-year-old child, Alexis, goes into her adaptive child. Oh, I'm so sorry, Mommy. I'll do it right away, right? I go into fear, I go into lack, I go into scarcity, and the big dinger here, the fear that my parents' love is conditional.
Right.
And when we believe that the parents and the adults in our life have conditional love for us,
it's traumatizing.
It is traumatizing. And so we become the people pleasers, right? Goody two shoes, we put it all together where we are always calm and kind and collected, even though inside we are struggling, right?
And we're being labeled a good little girl when we behave this way, right?
Yes, because we're easier to deal with, right? So many kids, when they have a critical parent, would go into their adaptive child. And some kids would end up going into their rebellious child, right? So after a while of my mom constantly being in her critical parent when I was growing up, she went, my inner child honestly was done being adaptive and she was ready to become rebellious. And boy, did she ever. And that's when it's like, screw you guys are the problem. I don't want to be a part of this family anymore. I'm going to push buttons at every single chance that I can get. I'm going to be as crazy as possible so I get all the attention that I'm needing, right? It's a really needy kind of chaotic state.
Right. Yeah. And there's, oftentimes the rebellious child is somebody who is getting into trouble with the law. They're numbing with substances. Same
Detention a lot. Problems with teachers.
Yeah, and an adaptive child also is somebody who numbs as well after a while because they just can't stand the internal pressure of not being able to be who they are. Okay.
Yeah.
Now, there's also the super parent ego state. And the super parent ego state is the enabler as well, okay? That's the parent who...
the SP up there,
right?
Super parent.
That's the parent who's like, oh, let's go to Disneyland. I know you've got a test tomorrow, but instead of studying, I know it would be much more fun to go to Disneyland. And the reason that super parent is operating from that perspective is that they have a void inside of themselves to feel loved and to feel like their child loves them the most. And we are operating from this place of fear of not being good enough ourselves and wanting our child to be our friend, wanting our child to be attached to us. It causes this codependent, unhealthy relationship. If the child is in trouble with the law, it's like, oh, I'll bail you out of jail and there will be no consequences, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like I'm going to make everything okay just by shuffling aside all of the work and just fixing the issue without really addressing what the problem was. And so what's interesting is my mom often went back and forth between critical parent and super parent, right?
Yeah.
And so she would, ream me about something and I would go into my adaptive child and then she'd feel bad about it and then she'd go into super parent instead of really like acknowledging what just happened and processing it with me. She'd go, let's go to ice cream. Or let's go to so-and-so's house.
Oh, don't worry,
don't
cry.
Yeah.
Mommy will take care of it. Mommy will make it better. Let's go to Target and get you a Barbie doll.
So it's this very like high, low, high, low, high, low. And the child feels really unstable. The child is not grounded because she has a parent who is
not reliable.
Not reliable.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Now, the thing is that when we have a parent who's so unbalanced and is in these unhealthy parental states, what happens with the child is that this C inside of this jelly bean essentially becomes so big that the adult is squashed, and that the parent doesn't, like the parent ego state doesn't trust its ability to make up its own mind. It doesn't know how to navigate life on its own.
How many of us are going, I mean, everybody that's an adult that I know in my life isn't really an adult. They're a child. They're walking around. They're not really wanting to commit to anything. They're not taking anything seriously.
They don't trust themselves.
Yes.
They don't set boundaries with themselves. If they do set boundaries,
they don't know how to have healthy relationships.
They don't know how to be in integrity with their boundaries.
Yeah, they don't know how to communicate. They don't know how to, you know, really be the functioning adult, which we're going to get there in a second. The third parenting state is the nurturing parent, the NP. Yes. And I know that for many of us, we strive to be the nurturing parent with our kids. And don't get me wrong, I mean, I strive for this every day, but there are times where sometimes I do resort back into the critical parent or back into super parent.
Yeah.
It happens. But the goal of the nurturing parent is the fully self-actualized adult, the person who's gone in and done the work, the person who understands that their children are their own being, and that they're just here to teach them and guide them on their journey. They're patient, they're caring.
And I think that the nurturing parent also realizes that they're actually raising adults and not children, right? So the nurturing part is important, but at some point when the child gets to be 8 or 10 years old, they say 8 for a girl, 10 for a boy, nurturing parent needs to sort of step away, and the adult needs to start communicating with the child, where the adult is asking the child to take on responsibilities that the child becomes capable of at these different ages, so that you are raising an adult and not keeping your child a prisoner to this sense of, I need mom and dad to do it for me, right?
Yeah. So an example of nurturing parent, you know, your child gets a bad grade at school. And there, you know, you have 3 different options here. You can go to critical parent. Gosh, we studied for 30 minutes last night. How did you not get that? You can go to super parent. Oh, that's okay, honey. I'll hire you a tutor at $500 and we'll just make sure that you know everything, right?
Right.
Or the nurturing parent, which is, gosh, that must be really hard, knowing that after all of that hard work of studying that you didn't get the grade you wanted.
Yeah.
I'm so sorry that that's the case. What do you think we could do next time to prepare a little bit better?
Asking your child for them to become a thinker of their own, and to express their feelings and concerns. And if the child is suffering emotionally, to be like Alexis just modeled, you know, really, I really understand that this is hard for you.
How amazing would that have been if when we were growing up, we had that parent, right? That's the parent that we all needed. And as we go through the course and we start looking into reparenting, this is what we're trying to teach you where to be, right? The nurturing parent to your inner child.
Right. Learning how to self-soothe and emotionally regulate yourself as if you're, you know, as what you would have liked to have had. Yeah.
So there's a third ego state here, and it is the demonic child, the DC. And what happens, often DCs turn into
sociopaths, psychopaths,
narcissistic partners. Yeah. And what happens is it's a result of being in so much trauma that their rebellious child triggers this demonic child.
They feel hopeless and angry and so much rage, and they just act out in ways that create these horrific psychodramas.
Yeah, and so these DCs often stay very childlike, very immature. They are controlling because they're so afraid of their environment not being controlled that they have to control.
But they also operate from a pretend state of I'm in control, I'm the parent, I have it all under control. But underneath, they're gaslighting, they're attacking, they're squishing you down to keep you under their control because they're afraid. They have so much fear of being out of control and not being able to get what they want because they didn't get what they needed when they were growing up, that they try to control other people to keep themselves feeling safe.
And this really comes from especially having two critical parents. I mean, if you're
dictatorial, like that level, like dictator parents, right? That's the kind of parent I had as a little girl, was a dictator.
And then we have the last,
my favorite ego state,
I know, is the fun-free child, right? That's the child who's thriving, who is well-adjusted,
can laugh at themselves, who knows how to take a difficult situation, process it, and still have a sense of humor. It's a delightful ego state to operate from, and I often encourage parents who are struggling with a child who's got addiction issues or substance use going on, to talk with them from the fun-free, compassionate child ego state. And we'll talk more about that as we continue.
I mean, a great example that I gave on the Instagram Live that I think a lot of people had a big takeaway from was, so these are all different states that we can choose to communicate from. And as individuals who are, you know, healthy, thriving adults, what we want to stay in is in the nurturing parent, the fully self-actualized, healthy adult, or in the fun-free child. And so say now this is Harper, my daughter, who's about to turn 8, and here I am. I have my PAC, they're all balanced, everything is moving well, and Harper is throwing a tantrum about the fact that she didn't get a solo this year at dance, right? And so I have a couple of options if Harper is in that state. I can either come in as my nurturing parent, right? I can come in as my adult, or I can come in as my own fun-free child to break the transaction. So Harper's like, this isn't fair, Mom. I'm so pissed. I wish I could have blah, blah, blah,
Why
blah,
did she get to do it and I didn't?
And so I can choose to come in as my fun-free child, right? Which is being silly. I can, you know, tickle her or hug her or come in with smiles or whatever. And what happens when we come in with the fun-free child is that it actually it makes her pause her internal dialogue, so that way she can be pulled out of the scenario for a second and kind of break the transaction for a second, enough to just have a moment of connection with me.
Right, which is also, it's important to mention that when a child is in a highly emotional state, or when an adult is, they are actually operating from their amygdala, which is the fight, flight, freeze aspect of our brain, right? And so when you're in trauma or when you're in shame, you are operating from that area of the brain, and it's hard to make sense out of things. It's hard to look at things from a broader perspective. And so Alexis and I work really hard at helping people get out of their amygdala, and she does with her child, with her children. And so by going into the fun-free child with Harper, she's actually helping Harper calm down that amygdala and actually activate the prefrontal cortex, which is the executive decision-making area of the brain. And it's not fully developed until you're in your late 20s, but it starts to develop at a younger age, and we can help them come out of their emotional state by going into the fun-free child, or by having a rational conversation with them, which
they'll be adult, right?
And we'll talk about that in a second, or by comforting them from nurturing parents.
Yeah. So the goal with this, you guys, is to start understanding where we're at with our inner dialogue. What does your inner dialogue sound like? Is it coming from our critical parent, which is, you're such an idiot, I can't believe you did that again, how embarrassing for you? So I guess my question for you guys is, as you're taking a look at this, what's coming up for you? Are you thinking, oh my gosh, my inner dialogue is the adaptive child. I'm so sorry, I'm so sorry, I'll do better next time, people pleasing, right? Is it the rebellious child? Fuck them. Are you kidding me? Messing up my drink at Starbucks again? God, they're such idiots, right? Yeah. That's also some of the critical parent, right? Is your internal dialogue and your view of the world critical of yourself and everybody in it? Or are you in your super parent, the rescuer? Are you like so toxically positive
trying
about
to
everything?
fix everything? Don't feel your feelings. Let's pretend that didn't happen.
Yes, exactly.
Right.
So, or are you in your nurturing parent when you're listening to your inner dialogue and looking at your view of the world? Are you in your adult being rational most of the time? Are you in your fun-free child, enjoying life, not taking it too seriously? Where are you at in your inner world? Because this not only affects the way that your thoughts are, but it also affects your view of the environment that you live in. Right. So now, Mom, I'd like for you to talk about when the child becomes too big, or when the, balance comes off in people.
Critical parent is going to activate in the child this sense of, I'm not good enough. They are always going to have the power over the child. The child is going to grow up to be an adult who feels powerless. And
who spends all of their time trying to please mom and dad,
right?
Not ever becoming a self-actualized individual.
Right? And even in relationships to other adults, they will still practice those childlike consciousness and that childlike personality type, and not be successful in relationships because they're always dependent on somebody else to be the adult in the relationship. Yeah. So what happens is that the parent who's this huge critical overbearing parent or super parent, a lot of times super parents are these like Peter Pan type personalities where they're just always fun and playful. A lot of times they tend to have a little bit too much to drink on a regular basis as well. And so they're huge, these huge overbearing characters, and they cause the parent in their child not to exist really, nor to even have the adult personality type, but to live in this constant childlike state of dependency.
They need their child to become dependent on them, so that way they can continue to play out their crazy ego state of super parents.
Yeah, it's a really dysfunctional kind of family system dynamic that we see all the time in mental health issues and in addiction.
Same thing with the critical parent. The critical parent needs their child to stay sick and to stay in the rebellious child making messes
so
and having to clean up their life, so that way they can stay in their judgment and anger towards their child.
Well, and also not take responsibility for being a whole person themselves, where they're not needed by other people.
Exactly.
Yeah, so let's talk a little bit about what the adult sounds like, Alexis. The adult is the rational, sort of non-emotional. Like if you were to think of a career for the adult personality, it would be like a CPA, right? Like non-emotional, always looking at the numbers. Everything is linear. It's pretty stable. They don't go on these high and low trips, right? And they can actually feel like there's lack of emotion available as well. So there's each one of these ego states you can see has both positive and negative aspects. And we just want to be aware of them, because we're going to be able to start to change our lives based on how we choose to interact with other people. And we'll start to be able to empower our children and each other by learning to speak from adult to our child, to their adult, right? Yeah. And by learning how to speak from our adult to their fun-free child, or from our fun-free child to theirs. So this is just the beginning of understanding how these dynamics play out in the family system. Obviously, there's a lot more depth that we can go into. We're going to be talking about using some scripts or some tools in the next portion of this module that will help you activate the adult in the relationship, and also the fun-free child.
Yeah, and I just want to be clear, guys, that what we're talking about here today applies in every area of our life. Doesn't matter if you're a parent or not. We're talking about your experience as a child, your experience in relationships today, and your experience in your relationship with yourself. This applies to every type of relationship out there. Yeah. Doesn't matter if you're a parent or not. It's just something to be aware of, as we're asking you to go back deep, deep, deep into your childhood, when you're looking at that Maslow's hierarchy of needs, it's interesting when I was doing this work, going, man, my mom was such a critical parent, and reviewing the ways in which she was critical of me and how that affected my feelings of safety and being loved and belonging in my family system. And to understand, oh, okay, so that's where the people pleasing came from. Right? That's where I lost my identity. I no longer had an identity because all of a sudden I just became this thing that was trying to survive. It's funny because we were talking on the group call about adaptive children and about ADD. And it's so interesting because these days, so many kids are being diagnosed as ADD, but what's really going on is that they're adaptive children. How can you pay attention in school when your adaptive child is constantly being triggered at home? You're always having to think 10 steps ahead. Is mom going to get mad at me if I flunk this test? Is dad going to come home drunk? Are my parents going to argue when I get home? It's like you can't actually think in school or in any environment when you're constantly in this adaptive child.
It's almost like you're living in a defensive mode, right?
Yeah. And defense all the time, trying to plan 10 steps ahead so that way your adaptive child is safe. Because you realize that when you have a critical parent or even a super parent and that adaptive child is triggered, you realize that the only person who's going to look out for you is you. You really go into that, preservation mode.
Yeah. And by the way, this does get passed on from one generation to the next, because I was raised with a very critical parent and a super parent. And, I operated from adaptive child and rebellious child. And then when I went into my parenting, that critical parent voice in my head and super parent voice in my head were really, really lodged in there from my own childhood. And I know that was my parents' experience as well, So.
And how does that get lodged? A quick recap of earlier parts of this course, we were talking about subconscious belief systems and subconscious programming. It's in those first 0 to 7 years of life. When you're constantly being criticized at home, how else are you, what other voice are you going to develop for your inner, dialogue? It's going to be that of critical parent or rebellious child or adaptive child. It's certainly not going to be the self-actualized, fully functioning, healthy adult. It's not going to be the nurturing parent. At 7, you don't have the capability to go, it's okay, Alexis, we're going to get through this. I know this is really hard. And you don't have the ability to become the fun-free child either, because you're constantly in a state of stress.
Exactly. And so real quick, I just want to kind of go over again, like the different type of professions that these huge P-parent ego states take on would be like a position of a police officer or a doctor or somebody who has a lot of authority. And sometimes it's a healthy choice on their part, and sometimes it's living in reaction to having been an adaptive child and wanting to take on power as an adult, right? So again, any of these can be positively activated, or they can be negatively activated. The adult we talked about is sort of like the librarian or the CPA ego state, and the childlike ego state would be more like a bartender or a character at Disneyland or somebody who works in the circus, right? And so, that's just sort of to give you like a broader perspective. And these do serve different purposes in our lives, and we just have to be conscious of which ones we want to operate in different relationships with ourselves and with each other.
So in the next part, we're going to be going over the drama triangle, and we're going to be looking at how these different ego states play out in our dialogue and in our relationships.